They chained up my water well like I was some kind of criminal. And honestly, the craziest part wasn't even the lock. It was how casual they acted about it, like they genuinely believed they had the right to walk onto my land and decide who controlled the water underneath it. And looking back now, after the investigations, the lawsuits, the neighbors turning on each other, and half the HOA board disappearing overnight, I still think about the moment I first saw that metal box sitting over my wellhead, shining in the morning sun like a threat somebody wanted me to notice. I remember standing there holding an empty watering can, still half asleep, staring at that thing, trying to make sense of what I was looking at. At first, I thought maybe county workers had come by for maintenance or inspections, except county workers don't usually leave bright red violation tags zip-tied to your property. This one said non-compliant water source in giant block letters. Underneath that it said do not tamper, and hanging from the latch was this thick silver padlock that looked way too expensive for something so petty. I just stood there blinking at it while my dog Rusty kept sniffing around the base of the well like he knew something wasn't right. The weird thing is, I'd already had a bad feeling about the HOA for months by then. You know how some neighborhoods get this strange little power culture once people start feeling important? That was Cedar Ridge Estates all over. It started small after the housing boom hit our county. New families moved in from the city, property values shot up, suddenly everybody cared about community image and uniform infrastructure, and all these polished little phrases people use when they're trying to control each other without sounding controlling. I'd lived out there nearly 16 years at that point. Built the house myself with my older brother Nate before he moved to Wyoming. Dug that well legally, permitted through the county, passed every inspection. Never missed a tax payment. Never asked the HOA for a single thing. Hell, technically my property sat outside the municipal water expansion zone anyway, which meant I wasn't even connected to city water lines. But that didn't stop the HOA president, Gloria Vance, from treating the whole neighborhood like her personal kingdom. Gloria was one of those people who smiled too hard. Every conversation with her felt rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in the mirror beforehand. About 6 months before all this happened, she started pushing this community modernization initiative, which sounded nice until you realized it basically meant forcing everybody onto one centralized water system managed through HOA fees. At one of the meetings, she stood up in front of everybody wearing this cream-colored blazer and started talking about future growth and shared responsibility. Meanwhile, half the retirees in the room were just trying to figure out why their dues kept increasing every year. I remember raising my hand and saying, "I'm outside the service boundary, Gloria. My well's private and county approved." She gave me this tight little smile and said, "Well, sometimes communities evolve beyond old arrangements, Daniel." Old arrangements. Like my land was some outdated inconvenience standing in the way of her little suburban empire. People laughed awkwardly after she said it, not because it was funny, but because nobody wanted to be the next target. And once Gloria locked onto somebody, she stayed on them. Suddenly, I started getting violation notices for stupid things. My shed paint wasn't earth tone compliant. My truck was visually disruptive. One letter even complained that Rusty barked too much at dusk. I knew what it really was. She hated that I didn't need their system. Everybody else paid monthly water assessments. I didn't. Everybody else depended on HOA infrastructure. I didn't. And people like Gloria can tolerate a lot of things, except somebody proving they don't actually need them. So the morning I found that lock on my well, deep down, part of me already knew exactly who was behind it. I walked back inside, grabbed my phone, and called the HOA office. Their operations manager, Todd Mercer, answered on the second ring with that fake customer service voice people use when they already think they're smarter than you. "Cedar Ridge Community Services, this is Todd." I said, "You want to explain why somebody chained up my damn well?" There was this pause. Then I actually heard the guy chuckle under his breath. "Mr. Harper," he said, "all residents are transitioning to the new community water network effective next Friday." I told him they had no jurisdiction over my water source. He goes, real calm, real smug, "Well, if you intend to remain part of this community, cooperation is expected." That word stuck with me. Cooperation. Funny how people start sounding authoritarian the second they get a clipboard and a budget meeting. I hung up before I said something stupid, but I could already feel something ugly building underneath all of it. Not just anger, something colder. Because it suddenly hit me these people genuinely believed they could push anyone around as long as they wrapped it in enough paperwork. And the worst part was, most of the neighborhood would probably let them. That same night, somebody slid another notice under my front door threatening daily fines for unauthorized independent water usage. I barely slept. Then the next morning I turned on my kitchen faucet, and nothing came out. Not even a drip. Just air and silence. And standing there in that quiet kitchen, hearing the pipes cough dry, while construction crews outside flushed fresh chlorinated water through the new neighborhood lines. That's when I realized this wasn't some HOA dispute anymore. This had turned into a fight over control. And I decided right then, if they wanted a war over water, they picked the wrong guy. The thing about anger is, if you let it sit long enough without doing anything useful, it starts eating holes through your judgment. And trust me, for about 12 hours, I wanted to march straight into the HOA office and rip that lock off my well with bolt cutters while Gloria and Todd watched. But somewhere around 2 in the morning, sitting at my kitchen table with a flashlight because I was trying to conserve the backup generator, I realized something that changed the entire direction of this story. People like Gloria don't usually think they're villains. They think they're protected. Protected by paperwork, by committees, by neighbors too exhausted to push back. Which meant if they were bold enough to physically interfere with my well, they probably believed nobody would ever look too closely at what they were doing. And that thought bothered me more than the lock itself. So instead of reacting emotionally, I drove down to the county records office the next morning. Now, if you've never spent 8 straight hours digging through rural utility permits, let me save you some suspense. It's about as exciting as reading old phone books in a basement. Dust everywhere. Ancient filing cabinets that sounded like they were dying every time you opened one, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry insects. But there was this older clerk there named Mary Ann who'd worked county records longer than I'd been alive. Sharp woman too. She wore giant reading glasses on a chain around her neck and somehow knew exactly where every document in that building lived. At one point she looked over the counter at me and said, "Honey, nobody comes looking for water permits unless they're either building something expensive or suing somebody." I laughed and told her, might end up being both. And honestly, I think she knew right then something weird was going on because her whole expression changed once I mentioned Cedar Ridge. She leaned closer and lowered her voice. "That HOA been filing a lot of fast-track utility paperwork lately," she said. Didn't sit right with me. That was the first moment I realized this thing might be bigger than just me. So I started pulling every document tied to the subdivision's new water project. Permit applications, easement maps, contractor filings, state compliance forms. And after a few hours, the puzzle pieces started fitting together in a way that made my stomach turn. There was no licensed municipal water authority attached to Cedar Ridge. None. No state-approved treatment system. No registered distribution infrastructure. Their so-called Community Water Modernization Plan was basically a homemade network of PVC feed lines patched into an agricultural irrigation source about 2 miles west of the neighborhood. I stared at the maps for a solid minute thinking there had to be some mistake. But there it was in black and white. They weren't supplying treated residential water at all. They'd tapped into an old nursery irrigation pipeline originally intended for commercial landscaping use. Technically non-potable unless processed correctly. And from what I could tell, nobody was processing anything. I remember this strange feeling washing over me then, because suddenly my situation stopped being personal revenge and started feeling dangerous. Families were drinking this water. Kids were bathing in it. Elderly people were hooked into a system that apparently existed entirely on HOA confidence and duct tape. And the craziest part? I honestly don't think most residents had any idea. They trusted Gloria because she spoke confidently at meetings and used words like sustainability and infrastructure investment. That's the scary thing about authority sometimes. People stop checking whether it's real. Around lunchtime, I stepped outside the records office to clear my head and called my brother Nate. Soon as he answered, he goes, "You sound pissed." I said, "You ever hear of an HOA building its own illegal water system?" Silence. Then he started laughing so hard, I had to pull the phone away from my ear. "Danny, there's no way people are that stupid." "Oh, they are," I said. "And I think they shut off my well to force residents onto it." That shut him up real quick. Nate worked pipeline maintenance for years out in Wyoming. He knew enough about water regulations to understand how serious that could become. Finally, he said, If even half of what you're saying is true, don't confront them anymore. Call the state. So that's exactly what I did. I sat in my truck with the county documents spread across the passenger seat and called the State Water Resources Compliance Division. The woman who answered sounded exhausted, like she'd been dealing with bureaucratic nonsense all day. But once I explained the situation, her tone changed immediately. She asked very specific questions. Did the HOA physically interfere with your permitted private well? Yes. Did they disconnect power access to the pump? Yes. Are residents currently being supplied through an unlicensed distribution network? Looks that way. Then came the pause I still remember clear as day. Keyboard clicking in the background. Papers moving. Then she said quietly, Mr. Harper, what you're describing may involve criminal tampering and unauthorized public utility operation. Hearing someone official finally say it out loud almost made me dizzy. Because until then, part of me wondered if I was overreacting. Maybe I was just angry and stubborn and escalating a neighborhood dispute. But no, these people had crossed lines they didn't even understand existed. The investigator told me not to remove the lock myself, not to alter anything, and absolutely not to warn the HOA. We need conditions preserved exactly as they are, she said. So I waited. And honestly, the waiting became its own kind of torture. Days went by. The HOA kept issuing fines. Todd left smug little voicemails reminding me my mandatory transition deadline was approaching. One message actually said, resistance tends to create unnecessary costs for everyone involved. I saved every single recording. Meanwhile, neighbors started acting weird around me. Some avoided eye contact entirely. Others clearly blamed me for delaying the water rollout because Gloria had apparently been telling residents I was threatening legal action against the community. One afternoon, my next-door neighbor Ellen came over carrying bottled water and this embarrassed expression on her face. She was probably late 60s, lived alone after her husband passed. Sweet woman, she said, Daniel, off the record, this water tastes strange. I asked how long she'd been using it. Couple weeks now, she said. Leaves this chalky smell in the kettle. That scared me more than anything else had so far, because suddenly there was a real human face attached to the consequences. Not policy, not HOA politics, actual people. 2 days later, things escalated again. I came home from town and found Gloria herself standing near my driveway with Todd and another board member named Rick Dalton, this bulky former insurance salesman who always looked one beer away from starting a fistfight. Gloria folded her arms when she saw me pull in. Daniel, she said, all polished and cold, you are creating hostility within this community. I laughed at that because honestly the audacity almost impressed me. You locked my well. Todd stepped forward holding a clipboard. You've repeatedly refused compliance. Compliance with what? I snapped. Your fake water company. The second those words left my mouth, I saw something flicker across Gloria's face. Tiny little crack in the confidence. Todd looked at her. Rick straightened up. And right there, I knew they knew. Maybe not all the legal details, maybe not how deep the trouble went, but they knew the system wasn't legitimate. Gloria recovered fast, though. People like her always do. She gave this thin smile and said, be very careful about making accusations you can't support. Then she turned and walked back toward her Lexus like she'd already won. But as she opened the car door, she stopped and looked back at me one last time. And I swear to God, for the first time since this started, she looked nervous. That was on a Thursday. The inspectors arrived the following Tuesday morning. And when they rolled into Cedar Ridge, everything changed. I was pouring coffee when the first truck came down the street. White state utility vehicles, no sirens, no drama, just slow and deliberate, like people showing up to collect a debt that was already overdue. Then another truck pulled in behind it. Then another. Within 10 minutes, the entire entrance to Cedar Ridge looked like a construction zone. Hard hats, clipboards, orange vests, guys unloading testing equipment, while half the neighborhood peeked through blinds pretending not to stare. I remember stepping onto my porch with my coffee still in my hand and feeling this weird calm settle over me. Not excitement. Not revenge exactly. More like the moment you realize the truth finally entered the room and nobody can stop it now. Todd was the first HOA person to appear. He came flying out of the clubhouse parking lot in this little electric maintenance cart like his hair was on fire. Soon as he spotted the inspectors, his whole posture changed. The smugness vanished instantly. He walked up smiling too hard, talking fast, trying to sound in control. "Morning, folks. I think there's been some misunderstanding regarding jurisdiction." One of the inspectors cut him off without even looking up from his paperwork. "Who authorized the installation of this distribution network?" Todd froze. Tiny moment, maybe half a second, but it told me everything. Then came Gloria. And man, I'll give her credit for one thing. She knew how to perform under pressure. She marched out there in sunglasses and heels like she was arriving at a press conference instead of a potential crime scene. Started throwing around phrases like temporary infrastructure adaptation and community emergency measures. At one point she actually said, "Our residents have been very satisfied with the service." That's when old Mrs. Ellison from 3 houses down yelled, "My water's been coming out cloudy for a week, Gloria." Suddenly people started coming outside. Once one neighbor speaks up, everybody finds their courage real fast. Folks holding empty pitchers, talking over each other, asking questions the HOA had apparently been dodging for months. One younger couple said their kid had been getting stomach cramps. Another guy complained his pressure tank already failed after connecting to the new line. And through all of it, the inspectors just kept working quietly, methodically tracing pipes, checking valves, taking samples from hydrants and outdoor spigots. Around noon, they found the illegal junction, buried behind the clubhouse landscaping under a decorative patch of river rock, like somebody honestly believed covering a pipe with pretty stones made it invisible. One inspector called the others over. Then somebody photographed everything while another guy shut a valve wheel the size of a truck tire. And just like that, the entire HOA water network died. You could actually hear it happen too. This deep metallic shudder through the pipes underneath the street, followed by silence. Total silence. Gloria lost it. "You can't shut off service without resident notification," she shouted. The lead inspector finally looked directly at her and said, calm as could be, "Ma'am, you were operating an unlicensed potable water system connected to a non-compliant agricultural source." Then he pointed toward my property. "And you interfered with a county-permitted private well." You ever watch somebody realize, in real time, that the room stopped believing them? That was Gloria standing there. Because up until that second, she still thought confidence alone could save her. But authority only works when the people around you agree to pretend it's real. And nobody was pretending anymore. By late afternoon, official notices were taped onto nearly every mailbox in Cedar Ridge. Immediate suspension orders. State compliance violations. Mandatory investigation pending. Residents crowded around reading them while HOA board members hid inside the clubhouse with blinds shut tight. At one point, Rick Dalton tried sneaking his SUV out the back parking lot and almost backed into a county excavator. I'm not kidding. The guy looked like he was about to have a heart attack. Then came my favorite moment of the entire ordeal. One of the inspectors walked over to me holding a wrench and said, "Mr. Harper, we're authorized to remove the obstruction from your well now." We walked together across my yard while half the neighborhood watched from the street. The metal box was scratched up from weather already, that stupid red violation tag still hanging from the latch. The inspector crouched down, cracked the lock loose, and pulled the whole thing free in one motion. Just like that. Weeks of threats and fines and intimidation, removed in 3 seconds with a wrench. I reached over, flipped the breaker back on, and a few seconds later the pump kicked alive beneath the ground. Best sound I ever heard. Deep mechanical hum rolling through the dirt, then water bursting from the hose in one cold, clean stream. I let it run longer than necessary, just because I could. Some of the neighbors actually clapped. Others looked embarrassed, probably realizing they'd trusted the wrong people. And honestly, I didn't feel triumphant the way I thought I would. Mostly I felt tired. Because the truth is, none of this had to happen. If Gloria and the board had simply left people alone, nobody would have cared about their little water project. But power changes people, especially small power. Give somebody control over neighborhood rules, and suddenly they start thinking they own parts of your life they were never invited into. Over the next month, everything unraveled fast. The HOA got hit with massive state fines. Residents filed civil claims. Contractors started cooperating with investigators as second lawyers got involved. Todd Mercer disappeared almost overnight. Folks said he cleared out his office after dark and never came back. Rick resigned from the board claiming health reasons, though rumor around town was he'd signed off on unauthorized expenditures tied to the pipeline installation. Gloria held on longest, of course. People like her never quit voluntarily because admitting failure would destroy the version of themselves they built their whole identity around. But eventually, even she stepped down once the county opened a formal inquiry into misuse of association funds. Last I heard, she moved to Arizona near her sister. Funny enough, the HOA still exists today. New board, new management, lots of promises about transparency and rebuilding trust. Some neighbors wave at me now who barely acknowledged me before. Others still think I caused unnecessary chaos by reporting everything instead of working it out privately. And maybe that's the part one still wrestle with sometimes. Because once the investigation started, property values dipped for a while. People got scared, angry. A few families moved out entirely. So every now and then I'll sit on my porch at sunset listening to my well pump humming steady beneath the ground and wonder, did I save the neighborhood from corruption? Or did I blow up a community that was already cracking apart on its own? I honestly don't know. But I'll tell you this, nobody's touched my water since. And if you were in my position, I want you to tell me honestly down in the comments. Would you have exposed the HOA too? Or would you have handled it differently? Because communities like this exist all over America now, and the line between protecting a neighborhood and controlling people gets thinner every year.